My God, so since last time, 4 teams have been eliminated, and those teams are FlyQuest, Estral, Loud, and Gam. And so I'm just going to quickly talk about it. It's going to be a very quick summary, well, I say very quick, about their tournament runs. I will do probably more in-depth videos on the team specifically, but I want to keep this one kind of short, and I'll talk about the draw tomorrow as well. There's just lots going on, so we'll do it in that way rather than like having a massively long video, because this video could easily be like 2 hours. So, FlyQuest. In their first series, Fly did beat PSG, but it looked really shaky. And like at the time, I genuinely thought like the only reason that PSG lost was because they moved off their standard center comps in game 2 and 3, and they looked lost in team fights. And like PSG had been using the center comps as like a crutch through playoffs, and they looked very good in the first game of that series. But like, so FlyQuest basically won that because PSG could not set up a team fight for like shit. So like, I think we can sort of scratch that game off, pretend it didn't exist. But to be fair, they beat the opposition that was in front of them, and they didn't look too shaky. So like, maybe like you should be taking that as some positives, just not overall. Like it's not particularly significant, let's say. And then in their series against T1, oh my god, it was not competitive. Fly got destroyed in literally every possible way. Like, it wasn't close. They were outmatched in every role, in every way. So basically, they can also pretend that series didn't exist because it was just like firepower difference, and that was always going to be an issue that they had. It was the fastest BO3 in International League of Legends ever, but still, I think you can sort of count it out. The only thing that really is worth taking from it is that your morale's probably in the gutter going into the third series. And then in Series 3, they had the rematch against PSG Talon. And in Game 1, PSG did make some questionable decisions in terms of draft. Like, their draft wasn't very good. Their early rotations into the lane swap were awful. But, like, they were on their Azir center comfort. And, like, they eventually won despite Fly having this massive early game advantage. And it was basically down to superior team fighting. I will get more into it in a minute, but it was basically down to team fighting. Game 2, Fly took away PSG's comfort of center and Azir by banning the center and picking up the Azir for themselves. But in response, PSG just got a really good, like, first rotation in that draft and had, like, the best response to the lane swap they've had all tournament. So, like, Fly didn't really get those early game advantages that they'd had in all 4 games prior between the two teams. Fly also did look a little tilted in Game 2, but what this series really exposed was that Fly have some serious issues with their macro, their fight setups, their understanding of wing cons, as well as overchasing and firepower. Like, in that second game, their wing con, they were basically playing a pick comp. Like, their whole objective was to get a singular pick and then, like, control space and make the opponents then overchase, or, like, just take that one pick and take an advantage from it, right? That was their main thing. And yet they kept overchasing, going for the second pick, the third pick. There was one fight in PSG's topside jungle where they got the pick, or maybe they didn't get the pick. They forced something out of PSG by catching one of the players off, and then they kept overchasing, and Fly basically lost the game off that. I mean, they were already behind. There were already issues, but like, yeah, it wasn't great. Estral also got eliminated from Group A. Against T1, they did show like a little bit of promise in Game 2 with the way they responded to the lane swap. Honestly, out of the so-called wildcard teams, definitely had the best response to the lane swap, but they just didn't really have the firepower to compete. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, I didn't actually watch that series against PSG Talon, despite it being a game between my second and third choice regions. But I just sort of knew Estral wouldn't really have the firepower or the understanding of macro to compete with PSG, and I knew that from pre-tournament, and I knew that based off the first 2 games as well. So like, I wasn't particularly interested in watching that series when I sort of knew the result. If somehow Estral had won that, then I probably would have gone back and watched it. Or had it been Estral FlyQuest, I'd have watched it. Or had it even been Estral T1 again, I'd have watched it. But like, I didn't really see much point in watching Estral PSG. Loud. Oh god, I don't want to talk about Loud. This team probably had the most disappointing tournament relative to expectations, especially out of the team so far. Obviously, there's the chance that BLG and Gen G could go like 0-6 from here, but it's not going to happen, is it? Lao coming into this tournament looked roughly on the same sort of level as your FlyQuest and your Fanatics. I say roughly, like they were towards the bottom end of that tier if you were doing a tier list, but like, or your PSGs, but they were just awful. I mean, against TES, Loud were beaten with relative ease, despite top not even looking in top form and having a ton of issues, but there was just too much firepower from TS, and I don't really blame Loud for that, because if you look at Loud, like, they're like your 2019, was it 2019 or 2020? The Bjergsen team that went 0-6 in groups, having 1 NA, they were that sort of team. They had picks that worked regionally. They won games relatively easily regionally, but you always knew they weren't going to really compete internationally because of how they'd covered up their flaws regionally. In Series 2, in their second series, they then had one of the easiest games in theory against GAM, who were ravaged by the match-fixing scandal that rocked the VCS. But the reason why Loud lost this is because their macro was dodgy, and into GAM, who just like basically stay in every game purely because of the decision making. It just meant that with a couple of mechanical mistakes, Loud were always just going to lose. Obviously, Loud also did make some horrific choices, but you know that's always going to be an issue when you're talking about these teams that aren't really like that well-rounded. Loud's top side did get to show their strength at points in this series, but it was really the shock when they let this team down. And like in Game 3, like Loud were abysmal. They were so tilted in Game 3. Just look at that bot lane diff. It was something like 8k between the bot lanes in terms of gold by the end of the game, which is just insane. And Senna only had like one completed item by the end of the game as well. GAM had like they were interesting. It was a rocky season just on account of being like a member of the VCS. In terms of the VCS match-fixing scandal, they lost their mid laner and ADC, with Emo and Easy Love only joining their starting roster in April. Admittedly, one was a sub prior, and the other one is like was a rookie, and the other one, which that's Emo, and Easy Love had been around the scene for a while, but like still, it's building a new roster. But despite all this, the roster was able to win VCS, building around Levi and their experienced players. GAM were a competitive roster at this tournament, purely because of their target prio, their mechanics, and their shot calling. They regularly drafted skill check comps with basically no engage, but they were constantly able to stay in games purely because they had better target prio than the likes of your Fnatics and your Loud. Personally, I think given everything, I think this team represented their region well, but this was about as well as the tournament could have gone from them. Maybe they could have nicked a game off Fnatic in another world, had Fnatic looked as disconnected as they had pre-playoffs, but like with Fnatic staying at roughly the same level as playoff Fnatic, GAM just weren't really good enough to like exploit them in the same way that a G2 or a TES or a T1 or etc. would. So yeah, this does sort of lead me on to another conversation that I want to have at some point about League, which is region merging. I do think we should go to a full Americas region, combining the LLA, the CBLOL, and the LCS. I don't know how you want to do that. You could do it the same way you do PCS at the moment, where you have like the regions feed into each other and have a combined playoffs. Speaking of the PCS, I'd also want the VCS to join the PCS so that we can have more competitive teams. Because if you look at Loud, right, they probably wouldn't have Loud and Estral probably wouldn't have qualified from a combined LCS, CBLOL, LLA league. But had they qualified, or actually even if they didn't qualify, they'd have had fewer issues, or they should have had fewer issues, because Loud and Estral would have been forced to deal with more. Like if you look at the PCS, right, the PCS has struggled a bit with the merge because LCO has somehow got even worse than it used to be. LGL has got slightly weaker. PCS has got slightly weaker, actually, like regionally. But then if you look at the top teams have got certain qualities that make them look a lot better. And if you like add the VCS to that, they're going to get stronger. You add Loud and CBLOL and LLA to the LCS. So, sorry. If you add CBLOL and LLA to the LCS, then they're probably going to get stronger for similar reasons. Obviously, we've already got like EMEA, which is a massive region, and I just really want to see more competitive teams coming from these big regions to compete with LCK and LPL, because as things stand, like it's not going to happen. And if you have these region mergers as well, like on top of having less weak regions, like you get stronger teams coming from those regions, there's a chance that now you can bring up the third seed from LPL and LCK on the account that you're losing literally 3 regions. And then that makes MSI more interesting, because G2, Team Liquid, Fnatic, I don't know if I said Team Liquid, I definitely didn't say FlyQuest, I'm not going to mention FlyQuest at this tournament, right? Maybe they can compete with your T1s and your TESs, maybe on a bad day they can compete with your Gen Gs, your BLGs, but like realistically, they're much closer to that third seed from those regions than they are the second seeds and first seeds. And so like having that in the tournament would also make this tournament more competitive, more meaningful as well, because you would just have a stronger competition. You would have better lower seeds as well. It would be much harder to make the semis, or much harder to make the top 6, because top 6 at this tournament is not really achieving very much, because you lose to your LCK LPL teams and beat like all the non-LCK and LPL teams, and you're guaranteed top 6. So, and realistically, I only call 5 teams like good at this tournament. Team Liquid can kind of get into that, but that's more because they're coaching stuff in the team. And anyway, I'm rambling a lot here, so I'll leave it there, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.